Can't shake this chill, and I wanna be free of all these layers and heavy things. Come on, spring, where you been? Come on.
It's a fair question. It's kind of cold today, and before we get to all this media news, and we will talk about the media news, I do want to say that it really is spring in Connecticut, and the apple blossoms are out. I was up on a hill an hour ago or so, and beautiful, beautiful apple blossoms are out. It was really cold and wet because it rained all weekend. But, you know, this weekend, for me, there's a demarcation point. And it's when my friend Chip Beckett emails me to tell me that he's got asparagus for sale in his self-service stand in Glastonbury. And so I got that email. I got it I might have come on Friday. I got it Saturday morning. Got in the car. Declan the dog and I got in the car. Went right over there. Bought some asparagus. Some fresh chives up out of the ground, up out of the cold ground. Chip's son is growing and selling native tulips. I don't know. We wait a long time, right? I mean, this wasn't a terrible winter or anything, but we wait a long time for these moments. And to me, the taste of fresh Connecticut asparagus says, we're headed for something different. And speaking of something different, as you probably know by now, I guess a little bit before noon, maybe the word went out that Tucker Carlson has been, he appears to have been terminated by Fox News. This was preceded just ever so slightly by the news that Don Lemon had been terminated by CNN. Don Lemon was on the air today, and he's been terminated. So there's a huge shakeup going on in the cable news industry. It's also other things are happening. Fox News got rid of or couldn't re-sign Dan Bongino or chose not to. CNN is spending, I would guess, a lot of money for a weekly show featuring Gayle King and Charles Barkley. I like both of them, actually, but I would be surprised if CNN gets their money back. I can explain as we go along today why a lot of this is happening or why I think a lot of this is happening. And because I've been teaching a course in political journalism all spring, I have been paying a little bit more attention to this maybe than most people have. And in fact, our final class is tomorrow. And what we do at the end of every term is we have a simulated election in which the class divides up into two teams. They spend a week crafting a media strategy for each candidate. So tomorrow it'll be Joe Biden versus Tim Scott. And the distinguished columnist Danny Haar will be the judge. And we have a lot of fun doing this. But it's sort of weird because here's our semester's ending, and Biden is probably going to announce his re-election campaign tomorrow. And then there's this huge bloodletting in the world of cable news. All stuff, because I should say when I teach this course, I kind of teach it in real time. I mean, the text for the course typically is the preceding week's news and journalism activity and stuff like this. So, I mean, the Dominion lawsuit was, and the, just the semi-collapse of Twitter, that we used that. We taught that and learned that in real time. All right, I'll shut up now. The number is 888-720-WNPR. This is Ask or Tell Me Anything. We have no guests. You are allowed to call in and bring up whatever you choose to bring up. 888-720-9677. Those are both the same number, just handled differently. 888-720-WNPR. 888-720-9677. We're going to begin with Anthony in New Haven. Anthony, you have the conch shell.
Thank you, Colin. I've noticed over the last few years, maybe the last 10 years, just like we have inflation in money, we have inflation with grades in school, we have inflation with online reviews. Shout out to your show about the online reviews. We've had an inflation in language. So I'll give you a few examples. Things that used to be angering are now enraging. Things that used to be concerning are now terrifying. Things that used to be great are now life-changing. And I have a few theories on why this is, and then I'm curious to hear your take on this.
All right. I'm ecstatic that you're calling in about this. Continue.
Okay. The first one is social media. So people have to feel like they have to use hyperbole to cut through the noise. There's so much out there. The only way to stand out is to use sort of hyperbolic language. The second thing is that, we have so many devices and things going on that distract us. So smartphones, tablets, computers, streaming services, smartwatches, and it's hard to get people to look up from their devices. So I'm imagining two friends, and one is telling the other about a bad date, and the other has his face or her face buried in the phone, until the one who can't get the other's attention says it was the worst date ever, which causes the friend to finally look up. The third cause, I think, is our most recent former president, who will not be named, to whom everything was wonderful or a disaster or the greatest thing you've ever seen or tremendous. So I'm curious what your take is on this and whether you agree with me.
I do agree with you, at least about the first two, Andrew. I'm just going to put you on hold for a second because your connection's a little choppy there. In fact, if you're talking on a cordless phone, I think you might be a little bit away from the base unit, but that would be my guess. So I think the first two are very true. I mean, let's begin with the first one. Social media runs on engagement. There's sort of a feedback loop that happens here, right? So you've got, first of all, we'll back up. Social media and the internet in general turned out to be funded by advertising. Didn't have to be, but that's the way it worked out. Okay, so it runs on advertising. Advertising requires eyeballs. It requires attention. So hence the attention economy. And it requires attention for longer rather than shorter periods of time. So how do you do that? Well, yes, engagement turns out to be kind of the code word for that. And so how do you create engagement? Well, not through understatement, typically. I think understatement is increasingly a dying art. It may come back. Everything comes back. But understatement, subtlety, nuance, these things tend not to drive engagement, particularly on social media. And so, yes, everything is just, in fact, worst date ever is just now just a kind of default kind of parlance. Even that doesn't really mean anything. Everything is the best or worst thing ever. So, yeah, I mean, social media bears a lot of the blame. And probably you're right. I mean, I wouldn't have thought about this, but I think you're probably right in suggesting that there's also another kind of attention economy, and that takes place IRL, as we like to say. There's an attention economy that goes on between physical human beings in each other's presence. How do you get somebody's attention when, to an unprecedented degree in human history, there's competition, a lot of competition, more competition than there ever has been for the other person's attention, because the person is holding something in his or her hand that is, in fact, an attention-hungry device, and attention-hungry and willing to pay a lot in terms of stimulation to get the attention it wants. So I think both of those things. I personally think that Trump is more an expression of, he's sort of the most glaring expression of the problems outlined in those first two statements than he is the cause of anything. I think, his style of speech is, a little bit sui generis and kind of very prominently associated with him. He has his imitators, I'm sure. So did JFK. I mean, but we don't all talk like JFK. So I'm thinking maybe that's less of it. But I think it is true that there's something going on with the language, and I think you've described it. I'm going to try to say this in a non-hyperbolic manner, but it's very hard to do. I think you've described it very well. maybe I'm going to put you just on. I don't know if you're still there, but maybe, Anthony, that's what we need. Everybody's got a freaking day. There's a this day and a that day, but maybe we need sort of nuanced day or something where everybody, instead of trying to talk like a pirate, just tries to talk like a normal person, expressing things in a manner commensurate with their actual emotional and intellectual worth. I don't know what that would even sound like anymore. Nobody talks that way. But maybe we need to just try that for a day. I bet you some people would find it kind of pleasant not to have to reach for the most extreme word.
Well, I think, like you said, everything comes back into style. So I think one day the art of the understatement will come back in an age in which just and I don't think people even really realize that they're speaking in hyperbole, but that's just become the norm. And it's very interesting to me as someone who appreciates language and someone who admittedly tends to engage in hyperbole myself, but I try to be aware of when I'm doing it, although my wife frequently points out when I'm doing it and not aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, thank you so much for your call, Anthony. It's a great way to start the show. And as usual, we're not starting with hot takes about the thing everybody's talking about, which pleases me. Although for once, I feel like I'm prepared to talk about something like this. But I think the point is a good one. But here's what I also think. I think as human beings, we are inclined to play with language. So I think, in some ways, a lot of people succumb to the exact trend that Anthony's talking about, where you just have to load up your comments. Although, as he said, there's inflation, and inflation carries with it an inherent ultimate devaluation of currency. And so, huge just doesn't mean what it used to. Huge means kind of large. I forget what the examples were that he used, but all those examples, they just sort of mean something about 2 or 3 notches down, right? Awesome means kind of okay-ish. So in a way, the whole thing has just recalibrated and will continue to recalibrate. And meanwhile, there'll be people who do want to play with language. And yeah, I'm not saying, everybody's going to turn into Oscar Wilde or something, but I do think subtlety will be, and maybe already has been, a reaction formation in certain subgroups of the speaking and writing population. And I think also just playing around, I don't know, I keep associating, so on a daily basis, I inform my dog, Declan, that he's the worst dog in Hartford. In fact, I sing from Sweeney Todd, the worst paisan. You are probably the worst dog in Hartford. Now, I don't mean he's the worst dog in Hartford, but it's the way people talk these days. So, and I wouldn't want to say that to a person about them. So I say it to my dog. I think we'll find ways to play around with this. I don't think it's going to, I mean, there is some degradation that goes along with this, but I think we'll still be okay, even if people do talk in extreme ways. Even if we turn into verbal extremophiles, I think we'll still retain some of our linguistic characteristics. All right, here's Mike from Woodbury. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how are you, Colin?
Just fine.
So I'm wondering, I haven't seen anything on the internet or in print about this, but the fairly recent explosion in transgenderism. I mean, it's certainly in the news all the time. I mean, I'm about your age, and when I went to high school, there was nobody that was thinking about changing their sex. And I'm wondering if this is more than just a cultural phenomenon, but an actual part of evolution in 500 or 1,000 years, if we're still around, which is a whole other question. Will we be one sex, or will it be, much less of a difference between male and female? I mean, obviously it raises questions of reproduction, but there are animals that reproduce asexually. So I mean, who knows?
All right. The first thing we have to do, obviously, is consult the Zager and Evans lyrics. I think there might be something in that song. I couldn't swear to it. And I'd have to just sing it all the way through to see if I could find it.
In the year 25.
Yes,
25,
yes.
Right,
I mean,
right.
They were obviously just really way ahead of their time. I mean, naturally. I mean, I guess there's no doubt about that. And they could see around corners and stuff. I think there might be something in there. I know you won't have a thing to chew. You won't need your teeth, and you won't need your hide. I think that's one of the first things that happens. So they're sort of looking into transhumanism at that point. I don't know whether they actually talk about the abolition of the genders. I don't know. And boy, this is one of these third rail topics these days. Like no matter what you do, you're going to say something wrong. I will say that, it's odd because I'm trying to think if I knew anybody in college who was transitioning. I certainly, in my first job, which is at the Hartford Current, worked with somebody who was transitioning. And we, I think most people sort of got it and were okay with it, and it seemed like a nice process. And, there was a little bit, it was male to female. So, male to female? Yeah, it was male to female. So there were one or two, it was surprising which women had bathroom issues. They were in some cases the ones, writing pretty progressive columns and, being sort of on top of all the latest trends and having, but it turns out they weren't cool about the bathroom thing. But by and large, it was a good thing. What I noticed during that time was just how nervous she was, or perhaps we'd say they now, but at the time it was she. How, and you just had to feel for the person. It just wasn't something that was going on a lot. It was something that I'm sure there were more people who wanted to do it than did it, because the pathway wasn't as clear. But I remember just watching, and I think a lot of us feeling just about how hard this was. And I think it's less hard these days, which is not to say it's easy. And there is more of it going on. I still think I haven't really bought into the Mike theory yet. I think this is a social expression of something that probably was latently around a lot more than we knew. Just in the sense that it's now clear. I don't know how old you are. I'm 68, but I mean, if you'd asked me how many, well, actually, I remember I went back and looked at the figures during the late 1980s, early 1990s when AIDS was happening. The question is, well, how many people, it was obviously injectable drug users, people with hemophilia, and gay people. So how big was that population? Well, the estimates even then were really way low compared to what they are now because so many people weren't out. There was no way to measure it. My guess is we're seeing a lot of that right now, that there were more people who wanted to do this. And it was around there, Christine Jorgensen.
I was going to say Christine Jorgensen. Yeah. That was the one name that I remember.
And the fact that there's only one name that we really associate with several decades of that, that tells you something. And then Vidal did Myra Breckenridge and all that kind of stuff. But I just think there wasn't a pathway. And I think what we're seeing now is that there's a pathway. More people can do it. There may be people who, young people who even feel maybe some pressure to explore it. And if they can do it safely, so be it. But I don't know. I'll keep an eye out for it. I'm not discrediting your idea. And I really do have to know what Zager and Evans said. I refuse to take a position on this without full knowledge. Although, I don't think it's in the year 2525. So it would have to be in the year 3535. And that's quite a ways away. I mean, there's no way this species is making it even to the year 2525. But that's the thing they didn't understand. There's no chance. All right. Our number, by the way, 888-720-9677. You know what's going to happen? Nobody's going to call up about Tucker Carlson the entire show. And that's fine. That's fine. 888-720-WNPR. Here we go with Tom in Manchester. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Colin, how's it going?
Just fine.
And sorry, I'm not going to ask about Tucker Carlson.
That's okay.
But around 1992, Mario Pavone released an album with a track named Colin Mack. And I was wondering if that was named after you.
I have the vaguest memory of that being the case, and maybe at that time somebody asking me. I can't imagine that that's the case, but I couldn't prove that it wasn't. Actually, we should, we're tinkering with all aspects of our identity and format right now. So, maybe we should dig that up. It's an interesting idea. I wish I had a stronger answer one way or the other. I can neither confirm nor deny that Mario Pavone.
Okay. I wish I had thought to ask Mario Pavone, but he just passed away last year, so a little bit too late. I'm
sure there's somewhere in the archives we can find that. All right. So I should just mention this because I don't know. A week from today, we are going to quote unquote relaunch the show. I don't even know what that means exactly. For a while we talked about rebranding, and that bothered people too. We're actually going to take a show that we did in the past about rebranding. We're going to update it. We're going to on a week from today. We're going to have the design firm. You'll hear the design firm that worked on redesigning our logo, but also kind of talking us through our identity as a show. There's some other changes that we're going to be making. So I'm just warning you about that. I mean, we're just going to do the usual nonsense. I mean, the show itself's not going to get any better or any worse, as far as I can tell. Although I guess there's two changes that could make it that untrue. One of them would be we are actually going to change the Saturday show that we do at noon. Right now, we just sort of pick what we think is the best show we've done recently, and we just rerun it. We're pretty soon going to stop doing that and do something different. And then we've also hired a new producer, Carolyn McCusker, who we think has like very, very interesting and unusual ideas about how to do this show. So, that could change it too. But basically, as John Lennon once said, it'll be the usual rubbish, but we'll just charge more money for it. All right. So our number, 888-720-WNPR. That's 888-720-9677. 888-720-WNPR, 888-720-9677. I do hope we have a call coming in. We actually have somebody who wants to talk about this. I'm so excited because really this is something that I've been taking a close look at all spring long. The way that this business is changing, there are ways both superficial and deep that changes are coming. And here's Kate in West Hartford. Hi, Kate. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. So I am calling about Tucker Carlson, and here's my speculation. Because Tucker's gone and some other dude is gone. I don't know those personalities.
Dan Bongino is the other guy who's gone. That was more, I think, as a result of failed contract negotiations. But yeah, continue. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, I know that Dominion had a big demand going into all of this, that there would be an on-air apology, and they didn't get it. So what I'm thinking is that Dominion finally said in the settlement, fine, no apology, but he's gone.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I don't think that that's it. One thing I would say is that they still have another lawsuit to come, and that's the Smartmatic lawsuit. It's going to be very, very similar. And with Smartmatic, it's sort of like, if you pay Aaron Rodgers $50 million a year, then you have to pay Jalen Hurts $51 million a year. So guess what? Smartmatic is looking at Dominion's number and saying we want more than that. And they've been very publicly specific that they will not walk away from this without that on-air apology. So I don't think they're going to get out. I mean, I don't think this is over at all. I think removing Tucker, I think there are three really good reasons for removing Tucker. And the first one is they can point to that in the Smartmatic negotiation process if they're going to try to negotiate a settlement, which my guess is that they will do. And they can say, look, we've already done one thing. We got rid of this guy. And this may not be the end of the bloodletting. I mean, I think the people who are kind of vulnerable are the people on that, that little group text thing. So Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham would be the other two. Bartiromo, clearly vulnerable. Dobbs already gone. But I think it probably has more to do with things to come than a pound of flesh that Dominion got and concealed. But I have a few more thoughts about this as we go along today. But it certainly is an interesting time. We are living in an interesting moment. Let's go to Marianne from Canton, and Jamie and Madison. Don't worry, we will get to you, even though you're calling about something else. Oh, I do want to talk to Jamie. This will be interesting. But Marianne, what have you got to say?
Oh, well, I just wanted you to talk about Tucker Carlson because before I called in, no one was calling about it, and I was afraid nobody was going to, and I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well, I mean, I just said part of it. Another part, there's several other parts to this. Another part of this is shareholders. I think Fox is about 60% shareholder owned. Don't hold me to that. I have that in my head somehow. Shareholders who are unhappy. And so basically the Dominion lawsuit, the discovery process, demonstrated just unquestionable reckless behavior on Fox's part. And then they had to pay, nearly $800 million, which is not as big a number as it seems.
Right.
And it's actually an inflated number over what they would have gotten if they'd gone to trial. There's just no way the award would have been that big, or the judge would have knocked it down, or it probably would have been more like $300 million or something. But I think Murdoch looked at this and said, look, what does it take to make this go away today? I don't want to have this in my life anymore. And that turned out to be the number. So,
Exactly.
but the shareholders, shareholder lawsuits are also a pain in the neck. And shareholders could look at this and say, right now, just firing Tucker, the stock dive 5%. That's just a temporary dive. But if the stock, underperforms because of all these shenanigans and because of the settlement and stuff like that, shareholders can get really mad and say, this is stupid. You're costing me value. I'm going after you. And so Tucker is maybe one of several scalps that they might hand to that process. And then the third thing that I'll say is this whole sector of journalism, or quote unquote journalism in the case of Fox News, and broadcast and cable casting is in terrible jeopardy. It's really almost imploding. So Fox is still the dominant cable news network by far. I mean, CNN is really imploding. MSNBC is just, sinking more or less at the level of Fox. Fox has had some pretty big ratings problems this year, but they were so far ahead they can live through it. But the truth is, primetime cable news is probably not going to be the business that it was. And some of this is because of cord cutting. I teach young people, they're not cord cutters because they've never had a cord and they're not going to get one. And so if you're streaming stuff, it's more of a multi-step process to get to this kind of content. There's a lot of other stuff competing. You could, instead of watching the Murdochs, you could watch the Roy family on Succession. They're a lot funnier. And so I feel like this is an endangered idea. And, even if all this Dominion stuff hadn't happened, Tucker might have started to cost too much money at some point anyway. And, OAN, and Newsmax, these entities, they haven't illustrated that a lot of people can do this. Fox News kind of owned this sector, but the real estate isn't worth what it used to be. And it looks as though some of their ratings will gravitate towards daytime, because daytime is when, sometimes I go to get my hair cut or something and Fox News is on and you think, oh, well, I don't really want that to be on, but it's on and I'm, or you go to the airport and Fox News is on, or, so, there are some ways in which Fox News, when it doesn't have to be a choice and nobody has to navigate through a streaming screen and get to YouTube TV and scroll down to where Fox News is, it'll still be around maybe during the day. But I just think this whole primetime model is, It's not on its way out, but it's just going to be significantly devalued. So why pay a guy that much money to do it? I don't know. What do you think, Marianne?
I don't know. So that I'm not a very interesting guest.
Yes, you are.
I was really interested in hearing what you had to say. I was a bit shocked because I thought that Tucker was a favorite of the fans, and
he is. He's their most popular. Yeah, they just fired their most popular host, Marianne. You have every right to be shocked. In fact, according to Anthony in New Haven, you have every right to be thunderstruck today. All right, we have to take a quick break here. We're going to come back. I want to talk to Jamie. I want to talk to Paul. Paul's very mysterious. All right, we'll talk to everybody.
In the schoolyard when I was a kid, I gave everyone my address, said come on over, and it turns out that nobody did. Swimming alone's how I spent my 8th birthday. Sometimes it feels like I never got out of the water. I never got out of the water, even though I did. Sometimes it feels like everyone's looking at the surface and it's not happening on purpose.
A flock of birds hovering above, just a flock of birds. That's how you think of love, and I always look up to the sky.
That's Emily Claire Barlow. This is a song by Coldplay. It's a really amazing cover of it. I mean, we don't have time to play it, but I really... it's called Oh, by the way. It's from an entirely bird-themed album that she just released. She's French. Emily Claire Barlow. And I recommend it. Seek it out on your streaming app. All right, so we have several calls here on the board. The number is 888-720-WNPR, 888-720-9677. Let's talk to Jamie. Jamie in Madison. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, Colin. I'm a very big fan of your show, first-time caller, and I have a really out-of-the-blue thing to present you with. But 7 years ago, I found out about my birth family through Ancestry, and in that process, tracked down my dad, who graduated from Yale in 1968. And from what I've been able to piece together about him, he died 6 weeks after he graduated in mysterious circumstances. And all I know is he was a student radical, and Kingman Brewster was in charge of Yale at the time and had told him that he couldn't keep him safe on campus. Wow. I mean, there's some real crazy stuff that happened. And I think his family thinks he killed himself. His friends at Yale think that it was kind of a J. Edgar Hoover maneuver. So his death is surrounded by mystery, and I can't put it together. I've heard from some of his friends at Yale. Evidently, he was pushed or fell off a building in New York City. And so it's like a crazy mystery, but you're a journalist and you're an alum, and I don't know how, like so many people have said to me, you need to look into this, you need to research, and I don't even know where to begin. Would you research? Yeah, like his friends have told me that they all had FBI files at the time because they were protesting the war and the Black Panthers and all that stuff, and phones were being tapped, and it's like a crazy story, but I don't even know where to tackle. Like, would you suggest like a Yale network of alumni to find out what people know about it? Or like, how would you, as a journalist, even begin to look into this?
There's one person who would be my first call, but I don't want to say his name on the air. But I'll tell you what. First of all, you should email me. Email me at Colin, Colin, just my first name, Colin at ctpublic.org. Colin at ctpublic.org. And meanwhile, I can think a little bit about this. You know, some of these FBI files gradually get declassified and stuff like that. I don't know what's out there right now from that period.
Right.
But
it was more than 50 years ago, so I don't know what the line is.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, this isn't really a question you should have to answer on the radio, but I'll ask it anyway. How sure are you that you want to know everything?
I'm very open to knowing. I think that in the people that I've met, I understand that my father was experimenting with drugs at the time. I think a lot of them were at Yale. So I know that's a possibility for the death. I also, I'm not sure about his mental health at the time. I know I was forcibly taken away from them. They tried to keep me. His friends say that he pushed me in a stroller through Moore Stiles. That was his college. So everybody knew me. I had a different name. And after 6 months, they were forced to give me up because of circumstances beyond their control. So I know that people know. I'm willing to find out anything. I'm so sad that he died, and I'd love to write about him or honor him in some way, but it's so much shrouded in mystery that I thought maybe starting with people that would contact me and let me know what they knew about him. I don't know.
Well, if I'm not
crazy thing, I know
it is. Well, I mean, I think first of all, you're very brave. Just a lot of people would just think, you know what, it's going to just upset me anyway. I don't want to know. So I think you're very brave to seek to.
It's worth knowing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's worth knowing. And a lot of crazy stuff was happening in the '60s with student radicals. So.
Yeah, my son is adopted. We know relatively little about his family there in Mexico. I've repeatedly discussed with him the idea of going and finding out more. Not everybody wants to know these things, but I think for you, I can sort of hear it in your voice. Yeah. You really do want to know. And so
I do. And so many people have said you need to look, but I'm like, but where do you start with something like that?
Yeah. Well, if I can help you at all, I'm not, a great investigative reporter.
No, you can't say it. I get it. I get it. Yeah, I'll send you an email.
Send me an email.
You know.
We'll see what we can see. Okay?
Awesome.
Thank you so much for calling, and thanks for listening. Okay. Bye-bye. All right, so let's go to Robin in Collinsville. Hi, Robin.
Hey there, Colin. Hey, thanks for that musical tip. That was really great. I have two two ideas about Tucker that I would love to hear you expand on if you could. The first being the off-air remarks he's made about Trump and his disdain for Trump. I wonder how much of that is playing into some of this Fox crowd decision-making on the executive level with Trump, in spite of what he's doing now, in court, if he's going to be the inevitable nominee for the GOP. I wonder how much that plays into managing Carlson or just getting him off the air, and if the party, is split on him. And the other thing I was thinking about were the days of O'Reilly, and a lot of really scared producers working for him. In another life, I used to be a consultant calling on that newsroom. And in light of the new information that's coming out with Maria Bartiromo's former producer who went to work for Carlson and all the beans that she's spilling about what went on there with harassment and issues going on, I'm wondering how much damage control is going on there by getting rid of him, if there maybe are a lot more producers in that very terrified unit working for him.
Right.
So I would just be curious to know what you thought of that.
I think the second one, we don't really know what's there, but if there's fire where there's smoke, and significant fire and significant exposure, probably that could help. I have a funny feeling that this wasn't done for one reason. I think it was done for a combination of reasons, and that might have been one of the reasons. And it is one of the things that companies fear the most. It's, it's interesting when you mention O'Reilly, because another point that's been made today is that when O'Reilly left, there was this feeling, they can never really replace him. Well, guess what? That there's a way in which Fox News is an information brand more than it's a group of famous hosts, you can run through the names, Hannity, Ingram, Jesse Waters, and now Tucker. But really, before that, there were other people. And what they really are is this information brand that is willing to take a certain position. And so I think firing Tucker may have been an easier choice for them to make than most people think. I think people assign too much importance, particularly in a place like that. I think networks make the mistake too. I don't know how much CNN just spent on Gayle King and Charles Barkley, but I can almost guarantee you it's too much. I think networks make the same mistake.
It's a bit of a derby.
Yeah, they just sort of think, all right, well, let's hire somebody really expensive. That'll be good. But I think getting rid of Tucker may have been easier. And I couldn't tell you that your first idea is wrong, but, Fox seems pretty comfortable living in this kind of weird area, and they don't even know what they want to do about Trump, and a lot of it depends on what the rest of the world does about Trump. I think it was pretty clear from the stuff that came out in Discovery, but also just, the general attitude about Fox. They would have been much happier with DeSantis or somebody like that. I think they were ready to end that relationship. But, if America or if the Republican Party isn't ready to end that relationship, then they have to have that relationship. But I don't think...
No one's safe.
Yeah. I also just don't think... Fox News exists in such a weird epistemic twilight world that I just don't get the sense that it matters to their viewers that their hosts were saying one thing about Trump behind his back and then another thing on the air. And I don't even think it matters to Trump that much ultimately. I think he'll do business, so that one's less persuasive. But, if they felt that they were exposed in the second way, then anything they could do to limit their exposure would help them make the decision to push this guy. So, more will come out as we go along. You seem to have pretty good sources. So, call in again. Let us know what you found out. I should probably take a break right now. We've got Paul and Chris. I think that's who we got. Paul and Chris. And we will come back and talk to them.
It's a lazy afternoon, and the beetle bugs are zooming, and the tulip trees are blooming, and there's not another human in view but us two.
We are back. Time for me to thank Kat Pastor. She's the technical producer of the show today and every day, except when Dylan is here. But pretty much today and every day. And Jonathan McPants is in here producing this episode, screening the calls, doing all that stuff. Can I say one more thing about what I was saying? Well, actually, maybe I can. No, actually, I'll say it right now. I think one of the hardest to understand and document trends in not just media, but a lot of other sectors of life is the way in which the oncoming generations do not live in time. The generation that's in college right now, the tail end of Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha coming along, they don't. Prime time, for example, is a fairly meaningless concept to many of them, from what I can tell. What do they care what's on at 9 o'clock? They don't do things like that. And they, for the most part, don't want to watch or listen to things in their entirety. So the idea that you would watch, I don't know, Rachel Maddow for an hour, or something like that, it's very difficult for them to comprehend. That's something their parents do. Their parents do that. They don't do that. They watch the YouTube video the next day. And if it's longer than 2.5 minutes, that's starting to annoy them too. But they don't live in time. And so all the programming that's based on specific times of day is in fact probably aiming in the wrong direction as it attempts to sort of catch the next iterations. So watch for that one. All right. So we've got Chris and Paul are guaranteed to get on, and then we'll see what kind of time we've got. Our number, 888-720-WNPR, 888-720-9677. Hi, Chris. We'll do one more Tucker Carlson call.
Greetings, Colin. How are you doing?
Good.
So yeah, I think one of the decaying elephants in the room maybe is the kind of a breed of, I hesitate to call it journalism, but what Rush Limbaugh was doing, and I think a lot of people tried to pick up where he left off, and no one's really been able to do it. One of the things I noticed about Limbaugh and about a lot of people in media, whether on the right or left, is that the tendency of them, once they've put a position out on the air, I mean, even in private conversation with people, when you say that you have a certain position on an issue, it's very hard to admit you were wrong when evidence is submitted that confutes your views. And when you've stated that opinion to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, I think it's probably impossible. I know I was on Limbaugh's show a few times. I know some people don't believe this. I remember Tom Scott, when I called WTAFC one time, didn't believe me when I said I'd been on Limbaugh's show 4 times. And I'd actually been on 5 times. And there was a way to do that I got through, but I couldn't remember what one of those conversations was about. But what I noticed was that when I had him on the ropes the very first time I called about climate change, it was about 1999, he was very clever with his rhetoric. He used first a petitio principii, or begging the question kind of argument to get out of the argument that I'd made, and then after that a straw man. And he was so smooth and amusing, I think it fooled everybody. And people on the right and left do this, I think, constantly. What really disturbs me about journalism in the country right now, and as evidenced by people like Carlson, is that they seem to want conflict first, because conflict is drama, and drama attracts people, and that sells advertising. And media today and Fox and all of them, they want their audience, they want to whip them up into a frenzy to get them to watch, get them emotionally charged and believing on one side of an issue or another one, and not to listen to the opposition at all.
Right. I agree. I mean, it sort of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the show. This is increasingly an engagement-driven attention economy. I will say that it's interesting. His point is interesting also that nobody has replaced Limbaugh. And that's true. And you can sort of see people trying to. Bongino has been trying to and got a terrific profile in the New Yorker 3 or 4 years ago as maybe kind of the guy who's going to do that next. But he has not even survived on Fox. I think the person who has been interesting to watch, too, is Ben Shapiro, who I'm a regular enough listener to Ben Shapiro's podcast that I could really track his ideological shift. But it did strike me that after the demise of Rush, Shapiro started to hit his points harder in a way that seemed like an effort to achieve that mantle. And I think, there's obviously been a shift in Tucker. Tucker used to be on my show on TIC just as a guest, and he was, early on, he was this kind of amiable, National Review-y kind of preppy kind of guy. He had the show on CNN with Paul Begala. He wasn't like this weird, Paul went away, darn it. All right, so I have to talk more. We have an open line right now, 888-720-WNPR. But Tucker wasn't the way he is now. And he's become more the way he is now with each passing year. Now, there's a couple of different reasons for that. And one of them is the one that Chris just articulated, which is, we run off engagement. An awful lot of it's visceral. You're sort of trying to kick tripwires in the limbic system. That supposedly is how you get people, or at least a certain kind of person, to come back again and again, that kind of neurochemical release of excitement chemicals. I don't know whether it's cortisol or what it is, but so there's that. But I think another thing that happens is what I call the mother night effect. I actually saw it with a colleague in the 16 years I worked at WTIC. I won't say who, but it happened to me to a certain degree. In fact, if Chris were still on the air, he would say this about me. That if you have an assigned role, like at WTIC, I was kind of the House liberal. So I think I was considerably more to the left in an orthodox way than I am now, because you kind of have to play that role. And then after a while, you start to get reinforced for that role too. People say, oh, you're carrying the torch for all of us. You're playing this really important role and all this stuff. And so you start to kind of believe your own press. I saw this happen really extremely on the right side with somebody I worked with there who, completely changed his personality and his attitudes about everything. But it was because of that shaping process. I think it's happened probably to Shapiro. It's definitely happened to Tucker. That's a lot of what happens is, and I call it the Mother Night effect because it's a novel by Vonnegut where this guy goes to work for the Nazis. He's actually an undercover American intelligence OSS guy, but nobody knows that except one control agent. And he gradually, after the war and well into modernity, has to cope with the fact that his role as a Nazi propagandist and the degree to which he not only fired up the base in Germany where he was working, but also in America where a whole bunch of, right-wing nuts. This novel, by the way, was written well before the era of, Alex Jones or Rush Limbaugh, those people, but their predecessors have kind of inherited an admiration for this guy. And he realizes that he may have done more harm than good, that his job was to use his role as a Nazi propagandist to send coded messages back to the Allies, and that whatever that accomplished, it may not be as much as the harm that he did as a very, very good Nazi propagandist. And Vonnegut's words are something along the lines of, we are what we pretend to be. So we should be very careful about what we pretend to be. I think you see that a lot with these people in the media. And one nice thing about public radio is, I'm sure I get reinforced for something here. For some kind of behavior that's different from the behavior. And I don't want to suggest that I'm completely a product of what I get reinforced for, except that a lot of us are, to an astonishing degree, very much like that. It's kind of the point of Naomi Alderman's book, The Power, and a little bit of the series, The Power, that's on right now. I think to a certain degree we do start to work to satisfy the things that we get taught are in fact satisfactory. So yeah, I'm sure that there are certain things that I do in my current job that, get me some kind of subtle reward because, public radio audiences, they're very subtle. So I'm sure I'm shaped in invisible ways by this job too. But I hope in good ways. I hope I'm shaped for the better. You don't always have to be shaped and warped out of form for the worst. All right, we have to go. Thank you for calling in today. Thanks to all of my people who helped. And we've got some interesting shows coming for you this week.